Good evening. My name is Eleanor Yick, and I am the current president of the League of Women Voters of Southwest Santa Clara Valley, which covers the cities of Campbell, Los Gatos, Montecito, and Saratoga, and is the sponsor of this pros and cons event. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all in attendance for this event tonight. The League of Women Voters is a national organization that provides voter services that are nonpartisan and does not endorse or oppose any political party or candidate. But we do advocate when we have studied an issue such as healthcare and have developed a position statement on it. This evening, we will be presenting pros and cons on the California ballot measures. And these slides are a compilation put together by the League of Women Voters of Cupertino, Sunnyvale, and the League of Women Voters of Southwest Santa Clara Valley. The team members presenting the pros and cons are from the League of Women Voters of Southwest Santa Clara Valley. Sophia Cow, our IT webinar director. Hello, Sophia.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I hope you will enjoy our presentation tonight.
Thank you. And Terry Zaccone, who is the chair of the pros and cons. Terry? Can't hear you, Terry.
Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Terry. And of course, myself, president of the League of Women Voters of Southwest Santa Clara Valley. The presentation tonight will last anywhere between 60 and 70 minutes, depending on how long you stay in the audience. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted to our website and other social media sites for future viewings. Your attendance confirms your permission to be recorded. The League of Women Voters has two distinct roles: voter service, which is what we're doing tonight, presenting impartial, nonpartisan information for voters. But we also have an action or advocacy role when we have studied a particular issue and developed a position statement on it. Then we advocate typically for legislation or against it. Background: how we prepare for these pros and cons propositions. League members research each proposition, consulting many different sources, including the actual filing documents that we get from the registrar voter. This webinar, as I said, is scheduled to last approximately 60 to 70 minutes and is divided into three parts: the 12 state propositions, which will last about 50 to 55 minutes, the 3 county measures, about 12 to 15 minutes, and the 3 local measures, about 10 to 12 minutes. Those of you in attendance can decide to watch the whole presentation or just certain parts. You can come back at another time when we've posted it and you can watch those parts that you didn't see tonight. Please remember, this will be posted to our website that you see listed here. I do want to point out also, there will be a short break between the state propositions and the county measures where you can get up and take a stretch, or if this is where you want to leave, this would be the perfect time to do so. Due to time constraints, only a limited number of questions will be asked. But if you do wish to submit a question during this event, you need to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. You please click on that icon, type in your question, and hit submit return. Only the panelists or the presenters will be able to view the question. If time permits, the presenters will answer 1 or 2 questions on the more complex propositions. We present the propositions in groups of 3. So you can submit your question anytime during that group of 3, and we will answer it at the end of the 3rd one. And the way that you can tell that we're going to different groups is that Terry and I will be going back and forth. Okay, Terry, would you like to introduce the propositions and measures?
Okay, California voters, in addition to voting on the candidates, are often asked to vote on proposed new laws called ballot measures. Now, the ballot measures that propose new laws can be for the whole state, those are propositions, or just for a local community, and those we call measures. These typically need over a 50% yes vote to pass. There are 2 ways that state propositions can be put on the ballot. First way is for the state legislature. You cut it back. Okay, so now we're at the League of Women Voters. You changed the slide there.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So 2 ways that state propositions can be put on the ballot. State legislature can do it with a majority vote, or if the proposition would change the state constitution or add a new tax or bond, 2/3 of the legislature must agree. Citizens, if they collect enough signatures using the initiative process, can also put a state proposition on the ballot. Local measures can be put on the ballot by local, town, city, and or county councils. So the general election ballot, November 3 that we're talking about, federal, state, county, and local elections, 12 state propositions, and some ballot measures are more complex than others. We will briefly highlight the simpler ones and spend more time on the more complex ones. 3 Santa Clara County measures and 3 local measures, 2 for Los Gatos and 1 for Campbell Union High School. So where do we get our information? Well, as Eleanor mentioned, we get it straight from the California Secretary of State Registrar of Voters on their pamphlet, and also data from the League of Women Voters. Voters Edge, Ballotpedia, and local measures, we get it from town and city clerks, and anywhere else we can find data. So we make sure we sift it all and get you the straight scoop here.
Thank you. Okay, the first proposition, I'm going to do the first 3. Terry, we were having some problems hearing you at that time.
Okay.
So you might want to check that while I'm speaking. So Proposition 14 is the first measure we're going to talk about, and it's about stem cell research, and it's a bond initiative. The question that you're going to be asked as a voter is, should the state issue $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds to support continued stem cell research? A little bit of background. Back in 2004, Proposition 71 passed, and it was a $3 billion bond measure supporting stem cell research. California was on the cutting edge at that point. It created the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine to oversee grants for scientific research, treatments, and clinical trials, construction of facilities, and college research internships. Now, the funds generated by Proposition 71 have nearly run out. So what would this Proposition 14 do? It would allow continued funding of grants to support research and development of treatments and clinical trials. It would set aside $1.5 billion for treatments for brain and central nervous system diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And it makes some changes to the Institute to improve patient access to stem cell treatments. What is the total effect of this? The total state repayment costs of $7.8 billion, paid at $260 million per year over the next 30 years. You'll see charts like this for each one of the propositions where we list the supporters and the opponents. If we have only 2 listed, we just list those. If we have 5, we try to list the top 5 that signed on to the measure. And I'd like to point out, when you look at each one of these charts and supporters, and you ask yourself, well, am I familiar with that organization or that person? And do I generally support what they stand for? Same thing for the opponents. Am I familiar with that organization or that person? And do I generally agree with their stance on things? And that will help you make your decision. Okay, what do supporters say about Proposition 14? And again, I want to point out, you'll see this sentence at the bottom. It says these arguments are by advocacy groups. They're really opinion pieces. What they say may or may not be totally accurate or true. They're writing it in such a way because they want you to support this just like they do. And when we come to the opposition one, you'll see they're writing it because they want to convince you to oppose it. You have to listen to both sides and then make your own decision. So what do the supporters say? They said California's stem cell funding has led to significant advances in treatments and cures for many diseases, including over 2,900 medical discoveries. Proposition 14 is supported by 70 patient advocate organizations. It will increase access and affordable treatments and provide patients and caregivers with financial assistance. It prevents cancellation of the ongoing studies right now and the clinical trials. It establishes training programs, and these supporters feel it will contribute to the rebound of California's economy as we move past this COVID-19 quarantine. What do the opponents say? They say, wait a minute, state funding is no longer necessary since federal stem cell funding restrictions have ended. Previous funding has not yielded the promised results for treatments or economic benefits. Private investors and companies have made great strides in stem cell research. They feel there's a lack of legislative oversight of how the money was spent. They feel there's a conflict of interest between the Institute board and the institutions receiving the money. And some independent analysis have questioned the management, integrity, and transparency of the Institute. Campaign finance, again, you'll see a chart like this for each one of the propositions. We go in and we attempt to list the top 5 contributors that we have as of a certain date. And if we don't have many contributors, we also try to find the total amount that has been raised. So looking at this first one, I'm not going to read all of these because you can, but the top 2 here under supporters, Dagmar Dolby, who has contributed 2.0 million, and the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation has contributed 1.0 million. Total that's been raised is 6.6 million. Now I look at the opponents. When we checked on 9/20, we saw none recorded, and the amount of money that had been raised, we had none available. That doesn't mean none has been raised. It was just at the date we looked at it, and we would have to check again. When you look at this and you see the amounts of money on both sides, again, you might ask yourself, why is this organization supporting it? Why is this organization or person objecting to it? Bottom line, what does your yes vote mean? It means the state can sell $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds for stem cell research and development of new medical treatments. And a no vote means just that. The state cannot sell $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds. This measure requires a majority vote to pass. The next proposition, Proposition 15, is a controversial one because it's about our property tax structure. This is sometimes referred to as the Schools and Community First Initiative. It's sometimes called the Split Roll Commercial Property Assessment Initiative because it would create a split roll. You would have residential property in one aspect and you would have commercial real property in another. What are they asking you here? And I want to point out how we do this. Sometimes when people are writing the question for the ballot measure, they put in a lot of introductory material. Here they haven't put in too much. It just says, for the purposes of property taxation, here's the real question. Shall commercial industrial property assessments be adjusted annually to market value? And the additional revenue be used to fund local government and schools. So they're trying to change the property tax formula, how it is done on the state level. A little bit of background. Those of us who've been in California for a long time are very familiar with Proposition 13, which passed in 1978. And property tax is calculated as the assessed value multiplied by the property tax rate. Now, under Proposition 13 that passed in 1978, assessed values are adjusted to market value only when the property changes ownership and cannot be increased more than 2% annually between such sales. One of the reasons this passed back in 1978 was that annual increases in property taxes were becoming exorbitant. And many people couldn't stay in their homes because they couldn't afford the property taxes. So this was a proposition was extremely popular back in 1978, but there have been some impacts from it since then that we need to look at. A little bit more background, all real property, and what do we mean by that? Residential, commercial, private, or corporate owned is treated the same right now. Doesn't matter what kind you are. And some commercial property has rarely or never changed ownership since 1978 and is now assessed way below market. So what would this proposition do? Commercial real property would be reassessed at least every 3 years to market value and taxed at 1%, which is the current tax rate. This proposition makes absolutely no changes to assessments of any residential rental, or agricultural property, or property owned by a small commercial property ownership. The additional property tax revenue would go primarily to local governments, K-12 schools, and community colleges. What are the fiscal effects? After this is phased in, and they do feel it would take a couple of years to phase this in, Proposition 15 would generate between $8 and $11 billion annually of additional property tax revenue, with 40% going to the schools and 60% to cities, counties, and special districts. It would supplement, not replace, existing educational funding. Now we look at the supporters and opponents. Look at the top 2 or 3 supporters. Look at the top 2 or 3 opponents. Ask yourself, why do these people support this? Why do these people oppose this? Or why does this organization oppose this? What do the supporters say? They say this proposition should be passed because companies like Disney, Intel, and Chevron should pay property taxes based on market value, just as most homeowners and businesses do. Many commercial properties, they might get sold, but they don't sell the entire interest in the property, and therefore it's not reassessed. Most homeowners, when they go to sell their property, sell the whole ownership to it. So we have residential property being reassessed more frequently. This keeps Proposition 13's protection for homeowners, renters, and farms. It will restore between $8 and $11 billion a year to our schools and our local communities without raising taxes on homeowners, renters, or small businesses. Where will the money come from? 10% of the wealthiest businesses will provide more than 90% of the revenue. The measure also reduces the taxable value of each business's equipment by $500,000 starting in 2024. Businesses with less than $500,000 of equipment pay no taxes on those items. And all property taxes on business equipment are eliminated for California businesses that meet certain rules and have 50 or fewer employees. What do the opponents say? The opponents say, wait, a split roll property tax will increase pressure on businesses that are already finding it hard to make ends meet. If businesses lose Prop 13 protection, homeowners are next. They feel additional costs will ultimately raise the prices for consumers, will make it harder for people to start small businesses, and it will require a huge cost to administer. Bottom line, Proposition 15, they feel will hollow out California's economy in a very short time and will be unable to attract new jobs. Look at the campaign finance. Total supporters have raised a total of $41.2 million. Opponents, $31.0 million. Look at the top supporters. Look at the top opponents. Bottom line, yes vote means basically that a split roll property tax will be implemented. The assessed value of commercial real property will be adjusted to market value annually. Residential rental, or agricultural property and small commercial property owners are exempted. A no vote means basically our property tax structure stays the same. They'll continue as is, only adjusted to market when ownership completely changes. Proposition 16, the next one, is also quite controversial. You're seeing a lot of articles now appearing in newspapers. I've heard some on the radio, both pro and con. So what is Proposition 16 about? What they named it is allow diversity as a factor in public employment, public education, and contracting decisions. Now you need to know, what do they mean by diversity? So let's move on a little. What's the question? And this is a typical one. Here's the beginning of the question. Shall Prop 209 be repealed? That's the important part of this question. Everything in between is giving you just a little bit more information. So shall Prop 209, which bans affirmative action policies and programs that give preferential treatment based on race, ethnicity, and sex in the operation of public employment, public education, and public contracting in California be repealed. A little bit of background here. State and federal constitutions provide all people equal protection. Passed in 1996, Proposition 209 became part of the California Constitution. And what did it do? It prohibits affirmative action policies and programs in California that discriminate against or give preferential treatment to anyone based on race, sex, or ethnicity. So that's part of our Constitution right now. What would Proposition 16 do? It would repeal Proposition 209. When that passed, it became Section 31, Article 1 of the California Constitution. If this proposition passes, it repeals that part. And what does that part do? It eliminates then the ban on using affirmative action that gives preferential treatment based on race, ethnicity, or sex in the operation of public employment, education, and contracting in California. Fiscal effects, there's really no known fiscal effects right at this point in time. They anticipate down the line that there would be some. Supporters, again, top supporters, top opponents. What do the supporters say? The supporters say, you know, California is the world's 5th largest economy, but many hardworking Californians do not share in that prosperity, particularly women, people of color, and low-wage workers. Yes on Prop 16 means equal opportunities for all Californians. They further say California is just one of 9 states that bans affirmative action. Proposition 16 will put California in alignment with the rest of the country and level the playing field. Colleges and universities cannot and will not use racial quotas to fill their classes and achieve diversity. They can't do that because that was a Supreme Court decision that was made in 1978. Finally, they say 25 years of data, both qualitative and quantitative, demonstrates that race-neutral solutions cannot fix problems steeped in racial discrimination. What do the opponents say? The opponents say repealing Prop 209 repeals, gets rid of the prohibition of discrimination based on race, color, ethnicity, or national origin, legalizing racism and sexism. Voting no on Proposition 16 means to disallow considering race in government decisions. Affirmative action has always been legal in California. What's at stake today is race-based affirmative action. Then, if more spaces are made available for the underrepresented, they have to come from someplace, and this is discrimination in reverse. Furthermore, they say, let's not perpetuate the stereotype that minorities and women can't make it unless they get special preference. Finally, does this measure comply with the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution and the principle of equality before the law? Bottom line, racial preferences are wrong, no matter who benefits. Campaign finance, a total as of 9/20, 13.3 million by supporters and 1 million by opponents. Look at the top 3 maybe here. And look, we have 1 over here. Bottom line, a yes vote means that Proposition 209, which bans the consideration of race, sex, color, ethnicity, and national origin in public education, employment, and contracting, will be repealed. A no vote means proposition will not be repealed and the current ban will stay in effect. This requires a majority vote to pass. Okay, do we have any questions in the chat room? I don't see any coming up. Okay, Terry, we'll move on to you and hopefully we'll be able to hear you. Okay, Terry,
Okay.
You'll begin with Proposition 17.
Okay, Proposition 17, this restores the right to vote after completion of a prison term. This is a legislative constitutional amendment. The question is, should people on state parole who are US citizens, residents of California, and at least 18 years of age be able to vote? Background on this: the California state prison or on parole to vote. Proposition 17 changes the state constitution to allow people on state parole to register and vote. So what does this actually do? Well, it allows parolees to vote. It increases the number of, and it changes the California state constitution. Fiscal effects: annual county costs and one-time state costs to update cards and systems would likely be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Supporters and opponents. Supporters, you see the list on the left, and then opponents, we were able to pick up 2. So what do the supporters say? Parole, by definition, is not punishment. It is intended to help reintegrate people into the mainstream. Nearly 50,000 Californians who have completed their prison terms pay taxes at local, state, and federal levels, yet are prohibited from voting at any level of government. The removal of the right to vote is not based on an interest in public safety. Rather, it is rooted in a punitive justice belief system that intends to marginalize people of political power. So what do opponents say? This is a criminal injustice proposal. It will allow violent criminals to vote before completing their sentence. The people involved include murderers, voluntary manslaughters, and rapists. An individual on parole has not regained the full trust of the society at large, nor the privilege to participate as a full member of society. So campaign finance. Well, there's been about $841K donated to this, and we hadn't recorded any opponents so far. So the bottom line for Proposition 17, a yes vote means that people on parole for felony convictions will be allowed to register and vote. A no vote means people on parole for felony convictions will continue to be prohibited from voting. And this requires a majority vote to pass. So Proposition 18, this amends California Constitution to permit 17-year-olds limited voting rights. The question is, shall the state constitution be amended to permit 17-year-olds to vote in any primary or special election that occurs before the next general election, subject to certain conditions? So the background. Currently, voters must be at least 18 years old on the date of an election to vote. Proposition 18 changes the state constitution. It will permit 17-year-olds to vote in any primary or special election prior to a general election if they're 18 plus years old and otherwise eligible to vote at the time of the general election. So the analysis, what does Proposition 18 do? Well, it allows some 18-year-olds to vote in primary or special elections. It increases the number of voters, and it changes the California state constitution. The fiscal effects, there will be some higher county costs to send voting materials in the hundreds of thousands to maybe $1 million every 2 years, and one-time state costs of about $100,000. Supporters and opponents. Supporters, you see the list on the left and on the right. That's who's supporting it and who's opposed to it. So what do the supporters say? Young people eligible to vote in a general election but who turn 18 only after the primary or special election are at a disadvantage. It provides full exposure to the election process prior to a general election. It ensures that more citizens make well-formed voting decisions in a general election. The opponents say allowing 17-year-olds to vote in primaries on tax issues and debt issuance is not right because they have not paid taxes. They will be biased by who influences them. 17-year-olds are still considered children, usually under the strong influence of their parents. They're not independent, and they're usually still in high school under the strong influence of their teachers. Again, they're not independent. So the campaign finance, there's been about $380K raised for this measure, and we didn't find any so far against it. So the bottom line for Proposition 18, a yes vote means 17-year-olds who turn 18 prior to the next general election may vote in primary and special elections. A no vote means 17-year-olds will still not be eligible to vote. Okay, Proposition 19. This changes certain property tax rules. The question is, shall we change California's property tax rules? Upon sale of a primary residence, eligible homeowners can transfer assessed property tax value 3 times to a home of lesser or equal value anywhere in California, or can get a tax benefit with a more expensive home. You got to reassess inherited homes at market value. Residents. The background. Currently, when eligible homeowners sell their primary residence, they can transfer its assessed property tax value once to a new home of less or equal value in the same county, or to one of the 10 counties that allow these transfers. California has 58 counties. Currently, heirs always retain the property tax value of their inherited homes. Inherited farms get it only in limited benefits. So what does Proposition 19 do? Upon the sale of a primary residence, and this can happen 3 times, eligible homeowners can transfer assessed property tax value to a home of lesser or equal value anywhere in California, or can get a tax benefit with a more expensive new home. Many inherited homes to be reassessed at market value unless it is used as a farm or the primary residence of the heir, and they move in within 1 year of the parent passing away. Inherited family farms retain their prior tax value. Some fiscal effects. This sets up a new special fund for fire protection. There's more revenue for local government, school, and fire protection. There's state savings on school funding, and some increased costs for the counties. Supporters and opponents. So we've listed on the left the top 5 supporters, on the right the top 5 opponents. So what do the supporters say? They say Proposition 19 expands Proposition 13 rules for homeowners who are seniors, wildfire victims, or people with disabilities, allowing the transfer of their home's property tax value to replacement homes anywhere in California. It closes tax loopholes on inherited properties not used as primary residence, and it directs increased tax revenue to fire protection, schools, and local government. It provides more funding for fire protection, emergency response, schools, and local governments. So what do the opponents say? The current tax code already provides for seniors over 55, severely disabled, and those whose homes are destroyed by fire. The California Constitution was amended 3 times to protect the right of families to pass their home and up to $1 million of other property to their heirs without changing the Proposition 13 tax assessment. Limits state legislators' discretion. This will cause increased competition for smaller homes. So the key campaign finance on this is supporters have put up about 40 million, and the opponents have put up about 45,000. So far, those are the numbers we have. So the bottom line for Proposition 19, a yes vote means eligible homeowners can transfer the assessed property tax value of their primary residence for a new home of lesser or equal value anywhere in California 3 times within their lifetime, or if the new primary residence is of greater value, get a tax benefit with a more expensive new home. Inherited home used for rental or vacation will not be eligible for the lower property tax. It will retain their lower property tax value. It means more funding for schools, local governments, and states. A no vote means no change in current property tax rules for primary residence transactions.
Thank you, Terry. Do we have any questions in the chat room? I'm not seeing the chat over here. Sophia, I'm going to move on to Proposition 20. This is the first measure we're going to look at. Well, actually, it's the second because you've looked at one already about giving parole rights back to, giving voting rights back to parolees. This is another proposition about criminal sentencing, parole, and DNA collection. As most of us know or should know, California was found to be, their prisons were found to be unconstitutional in the sense that they were violating the prisoners' rights due to overcrowding. And California has been under a court order to reduce our prison populations. And some of the ways that we have been doing that have been changing qualifications for parole, changing some criminal sentencing, and some people agree with that and some people do not. So this is one, it's about criminal sentencing, parole, and DNA collection. The question. Lots of propositions and numbers get mentioned here and it could get confusing, but the bottom line is, shall voters partially reverse Assembly Bill 109 and Propositions 47 and 57 that were passed in 2011, 2014, and 2016? And how do they want to change them? They want to change some parole eligibility criteria. They want to change the reclassifications of some misdemeanors as felonies. And they want to require DNA collection for specific misdemeanors. So the background, in 2011, the US Supreme Court ruled that California had to reduce its prison overcrowding to remedy the violation of prisoners' constitutional rights. In response to that, in 2011, a bill, AB 109, was passed, and it reduced the state prison populations by transferring some of those prisoners to county government's responsibility and had the county assume responsibility for incarcerating and paroling felons convicted of non-serious, non-violent, non-sexual crimes. A little bit more background. Over the past 10 years, lawmakers and voters have reduced punishments for people convicted of some non-violent crimes. This has let some people out of prison earlier. Voters approved a proposition in 2014 that reclassified certain non-violent, non-serious crimes. They changed them from being classified as a felony to a misdemeanor. And in 2016, voters approved another proposition called 57, which increased parole opportunities for felons convicted of nonviolent crimes and enabled judges to decide if juveniles should be tried as adults. These measures have brought the overall state prison population below 137.5% of capacity, which was ordered by the Supreme Court. Many individual prisons, though, are still operating above that percentage. So all these propositions and laws were passed trying to address the Supreme Court order that we had to reduce our prison population. Supporters, you see the top supporters over here, meaning they want this measure to pass. We see the opponents over here, they want this measure not to pass. Okay, what does Proposition 20 do? Well, it increases the severity of sentences for certain affected crimes. It decreases parole eligibility, and it increases the prison population at the state and county levels. Fiscal effects: increase in state and county costs due to increased prison population, tens of millions of dollars annually, and DNA collection costs several $1 million annually. What do the supporters say? The supporters of this proposition say there have been 3 related impacts of recent laws that were passed that they feel must be fixed. They said you need to reform the parole system so violent criminals are not released, tighten post-release supervision, and increase penalties for violations. They say you need to reform the theft laws to recognize serial and organized theft, and you have to expand DNA collection from those convicted of drug, theft, and domestic violence related crimes. What do the opponents say? The opponents say Proposition 20 rolls back legislative and voter-approved criminal justice reforms with extreme sentences and reduced resources for rehabilitation. The tens of millions of dollars that would be spent on prisons if this proposition passed would be better invested in our schools, homelessness, mental health, and affordable housing. And people are demanding more changes to address past policies that disproportionately harm poor people and people of color. Proposition 20 takes us backward, not forward. Campaign finance: who are the supporters of this? Notice the top ones over here.
Eleanor, people comment that you want to leave this slide a little bit longer. They want to see more detail.
Okay, so the top supporters for a campaign, for this campaign, a total of $3.5 million have been raised in support of it. You have the Correctional Peace Officers, the Association for LA Deputy Sheriffs, and on the opponents, Patty Quillen and the Chan Zuckerberg Institute. Total supporters, 3.5 million. Total opponents, 5.6 million. What does a yes vote mean? The yes vote here means that those convicted of certain theft crimes, for example, repeated shoplifting, could receive increased penalties, longer jail terms. Additional factors will be considered in parole decisions. DNA samples will be collected from adults convicted of certain misdemeanors. A no vote means the status quo will be maintained in sentencing and parole. DNA samples will continue to be collected from adults arrested for a felony or required to register as a sex offender or arsonist. Those are the only people right now that have their DNA collected. This requires a majority vote to pass. The next Proposition 21, it's actually a repeat of one that was on the ballot in 2018. This is about local rent control initiative. It's also called the Rental Affordability Act, and its initiative status. The question is, should local governments be allowed to apply rent control on residential properties? What's the current status? Right now, there is limited local rent control. Why? Because a law known as the Costa-Hawkins Law, passed in 1994, it sets limits on the kind of rent control policies that cities and towns can impose. Rent control cannot apply to single-family homes, can never apply to newly built housing since 1995, and cannot say how much rent can be charged to a new renter moving in. So these are all the current laws about rent control, and it's from the state level, not from the local town. Rent control prohibited except for older apartment buildings built before 1995, and vacancy control is prohibited. What would this proposition do? Basically, it would say it would give the ability to cities and counties to have rent control laws. So local cities and local counties could design rent control laws. Individuals with only 1 or 2 homes would be exempted from rent control. Rent increases would be limited to 15% over the first 3 years. And the overall effect on state income tax revenue is really not clear. The big difference is it would shift the control about rent control from the state level to the local and the county. Fiscal effects. People feel if you have rent control, you'll have lower property taxes because rental properties, they claim, decline in value due to rent control. More sales taxes. Renters can spend more money on things instead of rent. And the overall effect on the state income tax revenue is really not clear at this point in time. Supporters. AIDS Healthcare Foundation, California Democratic Party, Dolores Huerta. Opponents, California State Conference of the NAACP, California Chamber of Commerce, California Small Business Association. What do the supporters say? This proposition would help tackle homelessness because local cities and towns could impose rent control. They feel it would provide stability for seniors and veterans. Local communities can limit rent increases and preserve affordable housing, while it still guarantees landlords a profit. Opponents say, voters overwhelmingly rejected the 2018 rent control initiative, and this second attempt should also be rejected. Proposition 21 worsens the housing crisis because it lowers incentives for developers. And rents will decrease only when you have changed zoning laws, reduced building costs, and permitting delays be addressed. Campaign finance. Top supporters, AIDS Healthcare Foundation, California Nurses Association, Democratic Party. Total raise, $24 million. Opponents, Essex Property Trust, California Business Roundtable, Equity Residential, total $53.4 million. Okay, what does a yes vote mean? A yes vote means that cities and counties may control rents for housing older than 15 years, with the exception of single-family homes owned by landlords with no more than 2 properties, and local governments may limit rent increases for new renters. A no vote means basically the status quo continues. Rent control is prohibited except for apartment buildings occupied before February 1st, 1995. And landlords may raise rents for new tenants. Proposition 22. Changes to employment classification rules for app-based drivers. And in particular here, we're referring to drivers for Uber, Lyft, and other companies similar to that. The question, shall app-based transportation and delivery companies be exempt from providing employee benefits to certain drivers? The background. In 2019, the legislature passed Assembly Bill 5, and it defined the criteria for classifying workers either as a contractor or an employee. App-based drivers were classified as employees. And if you're an employee, you're entitled to benefits, sick leave, so on and so forth. But some companies continue to pay drivers as contractors, triggering state legal action. This proposition wants to exempt those transportation and delivery drivers from this bill that was passed and classify them as independent contractors. What would it do? Again, it would classify drivers as contractors receiving, they would give them 120% of local minimum wage hour. They would give them some healthcare insurance subsidy, and they would give them $1 million liability insurance policy, safety training, and sexual harassment policy enforcement. The fiscal effects, potential minor increases to state taxes paid if drivers' profits increase. Supporters. Now, these are the companies that support it. Lyft, Uber, Postmates, DoorDash, and so on. We all know that we've been using lots of delivery services during this quarantine period. Opponents, Joe Biden, Senator Kamala Harris, California Teachers Association, and so on. These are the companies that own, these are the owners of those companies. What do the supporters say? They say this is important because it protects the flexibility of app-based drivers, because as an independent contractor, they can decide when they're going to work and when they're not going to work. They claim it protects thousands of jobs from being eliminated, requires companies to provide some benefits to drivers, and creates expanded public safety protections. What do the opponents say? They say the current law does not limit part-time driver flexibility. Most drivers are not part-time and should receive AB5's mandated employee benefits. Proposition 22 replaces employee benefits with lower earnings guarantee and a healthcare subsidy. Proposition 22 is deceptive on background checks, which are already being done. A lot of money has been raised, both pro and con. Supporters, $185 million, and you can see the major companies that donated money here. Opponents, we have the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. This is a very large labor union, SEIU, United Healthcare, and so on, and you can see the amounts of money that they collected. Their total has been $12.1 million. Big difference between the two. What does the yes vote mean? A yes vote means that app-based transportation and delivery drivers will be classified as independent contractors, not employees, and will not get standard benefits, but will receive limited benefits as specified. A no vote means that most workers, including drivers in app-based companies, will be classified as an employee, because that was defined in the legislation, AB5, and will be entitled to standard employee benefits and protections. It requires a majority vote to pass. Any questions in the chat room?
Yes, we do have one for Prop 21, another one for Prop 17, if you can see them.
Yeah, for some reason, I can't see the chat room.
Okay, let me read it out.
Okay.
So one for Prop 21. What is vacancy control on Prop 21?
Vacancy control means that when an apartment becomes vacant, they can raise it up to market value. There's no cap on how much they can increase the rent on that apartment.
Okay. And do you want to answer the one for Prop 17?
I can try. Go
Okay.
ahead.
How possible is it for a person on parole to have their vote purchased by supporters or opponents of ballot issues?
I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, I would think that anybody who is purchasing somebody else's vote is committing fraud, which is illegal. I know currently there's certainly a drive going on in Florida where many felons there who have been released from prison and had completed parole, there was a law passed that said they still owed some money to the state and they couldn't vote. And some of your high-profile basketball players have gone to pay those fines so those people can vote. So I don't feel that's buying somebody's vote. I feel that's providing people the means to vote. You know, most of the research shows that there's little to no fraud when it comes to voting. Okay, anything else?
Also got one from Prop 16. Will a yes vote on Prop 16 weaken discrimination protection?
Would you repeat that question?
Will a yes vote on Prop 16 weaken discrimination protection?
Well, let me answer that in this way. So Prop 16 is about eliminating Prop 209 in the California State Constitution, which currently bans discrimination or preferential treatment. So certainly if you're a supporter of that proposition, you feel that it will not. But if you're an opponent, you definitely feel that it will weaken protection. So it depends on your point of view there, really. Okay? Is that all the questions?
We have one for Prop 22. I thought this was an impartial presentation. It sounds like you are in favor of Prop 22.
Actually, I don't have an opinion yet on Prop 22. I know what the documents are telling us, and most of the terminology in this presentation comes directly from the documents that have been submitted to the Registrar of Voters. And we quote the words from the supporters and we quote the words from the opponents. I know this is getting a lot of press currently. There's certainly a lot of ads on television. So again, I don't have an opinion at this point in time. And I haven't even made up my mind how I'm going to vote because I'm still doing some reading about it. So I hope it does not come across as biased because it shouldn't.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. That's all.
Sherry, we'll move on to you for 23, 24, and 25.
Okay. And Proposition 23 considers the initiative. So the question here is, shall dialysis clinics be required to have an on-site physician and to require permission by the state to close clinics? So the background on this, about 72% of California dialysis clinics are owned by two companies, DaVita Kidney Care and Fresenius Medical Care. The SEIU West Union is a coalition of union with about 80,000 healthcare worker members, and they have been trying to unionize DaVita and Fresenius since 2016. In 2018, the union placed Proposition 8 on the ballot. Proposition 8 would have limited clinics' profits to 15% above certain costs. That proposition failed. So they put this back on the ballot for Proposition 23. So what does it do? Proposition 23 requires dialysis clinics to have a minimum of one physician on site. It also requires consent from the California Health Department before closing a clinic, and it forbids clinics to refuse treatment on the basis of who is paying. Fiscal effects, costs for state and local government, are likely in the low tens of millions annually. So the supporters and opponents. The supporters are mainly the unions, and the opponents are the companies and the nurses. So what do the supporters say? Dialysis is a dangerous procedure, and if something goes wrong, a doctor should be nearby. Proposition 23 is designed to ensure patients have access to dialysis, particularly in rural communities. Proper reporting and transparency of infection rates encourage clinics to improve quality. So what do the opponents say? Proposition 23 would unnecessarily increase healthcare costs and make the doctor shortage worse. Proposition 23 will lead to clinic closures and cutbacks that will reduce access for patients who put their lives in jeopardy. Dialysis clinics are already strictly regulated and provide high quality care. So how about the finance? Well, supporters are the SEIU United Union and the California Democratic Party, and the opponents are DaVita Kidney Care, Fresenius Medicare, and U.S. Renal Care, the companies that run these. And they've raised $93 million as opponents, and the supporters have raised $6 million as supporters. So what's the bottom line for Proposition 23? A yes vote means dialysis clinics will be required to have an on-site physician, and they will need permission from the California Department of Health to close. A no vote means the current situation continues. No on-site physician required and no state permission required to close the clinic. Okay, Proposition 24. This amends consumer privacy laws. So what's the question? Shall voters, via the initiative process, change the provisions of the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, which came into effect January 1, 2020, and create the California Privacy Protection Agency. So let's look at the background of that. The California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, this was effective January 1 of this year. Businesses storing personal information must disclose what personal information is collected and how it is used and sold or shared. Consumers can request and not share or sell their information. Proposition 24 creates a regulatory agency and changes some definitions of consumers' rights, changes which businesses are regulated, changes some permission processes, and increases penalties to businesses. So, the analysis. What does Proposition 24 do? It creates the California Privacy Protection Agency. It adds restrictions on collection and sharing to businesses found in violation and authorizes civil penalties for theft of login information. What are the fiscal effects? Well, increases in state costs of at least tens of millions of dollars annually to stand up and operate a new state agency. Increased costs in the low millions of dollars annually for added court and Department of Justice enforcement workloads. And there's an unknown impact on tax revenues due to business effects. Okay, supporters and opponents. Supporters, we have Alistair McTaggart, a consumer watchdog, and Common Sense. And opponents, Dolores Huerta, ACLU of California, Alliance for Retired Americans, and a couple other people. So what do the supporters say? Proposition 24 would prevent businesses from using or sharing sensitive data about your health, finances, race, ethnicity, and precise location. A well-staffed and well-funded state agency will ensure consumers' rights. New definitions and protections enhance consumers' privacy rights and control. California's digital privacy rights can't be reversed by the legislature. A voter-approved statewide initiative can only be overturned by another initiative. So what do opponents say? Proposition 24 puts the burden on consumers to opt out of countless intrusive data collection practices one by one that companies are currently barred from by default. Changes advancing consumer rights are compromised by other changes which favor business interests. Consumers opting out for privacy may be denied or charged for some benefits. This is unfair and a burden to lower income users. Businesses can decide not to act if consumer requests require disproportionate effort. Voters should reject a complex 52-page initiative. So the campaign finance, the supporters, we've got 3 supporters listed: Alistair McTaggart, Eric Silverberg, and California for Consumer Privacy. The opponents include the Consumer Federation of California and the California Nurses Association. Supporters have raised $5.5 million at this point, and the donors have raised $48,000. So the bottom line for Proposition 24, a yes vote means a new state agency will be created, the California Privacy Protection Agency. Consumer rights and business operations will be modified from the current consumers and businesses will need to understand the new provisions and take action as necessary. A no vote means the existing California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018 remains the controlling legislation. Okay. Okay, now Proposition 25. This is a proposition to replace cash bail with risk assessments referendum. Let's talk about that. So, should the cash bail system for detained suspects awaiting trials be replaced by risk assessments based on determination of public safety and flight risks? So the background of this, in 2018, the legislature passed SB 10, which would do away with the money bail system. The court would not have to post bail in order to stay free pending their trial. SB 10 did not go into effect because this referendum was filed. Paying bail allowed people to go free from pretrial jail. Voters have to decide either to keep bail for pretrial release or use this new system of risk assessment. The analysis. So what does Proposition 25 do again? Money bail is replaced with a determination of public safety and flight risk. This limits pretrial detention in jail. So fiscal effects. Well, there are going to be some new state and local costs to do the risk assessments. There should be decreased county jail costs. More sales taxes will be available to families so they can spend more. And there's an unknown net impact on state and local tax revenues. So the supporters and opponents. The supporters include the California Democratic Party, Jim Beal, and the California Medical Association. The opponents are the bail people, chambers of commerce. So what do the supporters say? The current system favors rich defendants who can easily make bail and keeps poor defendants and defendants of color in jail. Bail may allow defendants to go free regardless of the level of risk. A scientifically researched risk assessment system is an effective alternative bail. Eliminating bail allows low and moderate risk defendants without financial means to remain free prior to. What supporters say, what opponents say. The intention of SB 10 are good, but its provisions may effectively result in more people being jailed than under the current situation. Government assessment is burdensome. More court hearings are likely, thus more pretrial incarceration and fewer options for pretrial release. The reliability of risk assessment is questionable, and there's a racial bias in risk assessment tools. So let's look at the campaign finance. Supporters have raised about 8.3 million, and the opponents have raised about 6 million. So the supporters are the unions, and the opponents are generally the bail bond people. So the bottom line for Proposition 25, a yes vote means that SB 10, which passed in 2018 and replaces the bail system with a risk assessment system for people awaiting trial, will be implemented. No one would be charged fees as a condition of release. A no vote means SB 10 will not be implemented, and the current bail system will stay in effect for people awaiting trial.
Thank you, Terry. Sophia, are there any questions in the chat?
Yes, there are three. The first one, Prop 24. If data is shared primarily on the internet, how are state boundaries meaningful?
Terry, do you want to answer that one? It's about the Consumer Privacy Act.
Yeah, I can't think of a good answer to that right now.
Okay, I don't totally understand the question. Would you repeat it?
If the data is shared primarily on the internet, how are state boundaries meaningful?
I would think it has something to do with encryption. So I would think that there are encryption systems that California uses that I'm not positive every other state uses, but I would think that they might be unique to California, and in that way your data would be protected. But I'm not really positive about that. Okay, what's the next question?
Prop 23. It looks like that trade unions are beginning to replace the government. Is this even constitutional?
Prop 23. Let's go back to that for a minute here. Terry, do you want to try to answer that?
Well, go back to it there.
This is the one, the bottom line here. So this is the one about the dialysis clinics. And so would you repeat the question?
Yeah.
It looks like that trade unions are beginning to replace the government. Is this even constitutional? I guess it's of 80 million raised. The previous slide.
I don't understand how you're getting that the trade unions are replacing the government.
I don't either. I wonder.
Lots of money is raised
Yeah.
for that proposition on the pro side.
I think the question, the bottom line question in this is whether the union has wants to unionize the workers who work in the dialysis clinics, and they want to improve, in their mind, working conditions, and one of those is by requiring a doctor to be on site. You know, I'm not sure if that's a valid statement to make, but that's what has been said, versus the clinics themselves. The people who own the clinics have claimed that you don't need to have a doctor on site all the time, that the nurses who are there are very well equipped and trained to deal with most situations, but doctors are always on site. And my understanding, again, is also that those two private companies do not want their workers to be unionized. So this to me is a question about unionization versus not. But I have heard pros and cons on this for people who work in dialysis clinics, some whom are supportive of this and others who are not supportive of this. So I think it's more a union question than anything else. Okay, let's go on to the next question.
This is go back to Prop 19 about the property tax. It is true that currently anyone over 55 can retain property tax amount if they buy a new property.
Yes, currently property, what's in existence right now is that certain categories of people, and so there's seniors, and there's people who have disabilities and people who have been affected by wildfires, they can sell their home one time, their primary residence, they can sell it one time, and they can keep their same property tax base if they buy a home of equal or lesser value. If they buy a more expensive home, they can keep part of their current property tax to apply that to a new home, and then they pay the new rate on the additional cost. So that's in existence right now, that seniors can do that, but they can do it only one time. And at this current time, they can only transfer or buy a property in one of the 10 counties that allow it. When that was first passed, it said that it could be good in any county in California, but the counties soon came to realize that they lost money on this when so many people were moving into a county and keeping their lower property tax rate. It affected the county's budget. So some of the counties began to refuse to accept it. So currently only 10 counties allow you to do that. For example, if you live in Santa Clara, I know you can transfer to San Mateo. I mean to, San Mateo County. I don't know the other 9 counties. I don't know. This current law right here now is proposing that you can go to any county, and I'm not sure if that would remain in effect or if a similar fate would befall it that has happened to this original one. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to take a short break here, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll continue on with the county measures and the local measures. So if you want to leave at this time, this is a perfect time. We finished the state propositions, and those of you who live specifically in Santa Clara County might want to stay and listen to those county measures and the local measures. So again, we'll take a break for about 3 minutes so you can get up and stretch and move around a little bit. Three Santa Clara County measures Two of these measures affects everybody who lives in Santa Clara County, and one of them only affects certain people who live in certain areas. The first one we're going to look at is Santa Clara County Measure RR. And this was a measure put on the ballot by the Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Authority, which basically runs CalTrain. It impacts all of Santa Clara County, and it's a sales tax initiative, an actual increase in sales tax. 2/3 vote is needed to pass. Again, very large introduction here, but basically it's saying, shall the Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board's resolution levying a 30-year 1/8 cent sales tax with oversight and audits providing approximately $100 million annually for CalTrain that the state cannot take away be adopted. So shall this resolution levying a 30-year 1/8 cent sales tax be adopted? A little bit of background. The Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board, CalTrain, is an independent agency which is responsible for the operations, capital projects, and planning for the 3-county train service on the San Francisco Peninsula. CalTrain is funded by 3 of those 3 partners, the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, the San Mateo County Transit District, and the City and County of San Francisco. And based on a formula, based on the ridership, determines the annual contributions from each entity that they give to CalTrain to operate. And this has totaled approximately $30 million. The CalTrain Board of Directors has now placed this proposed 1/8 cent sales tax on the November ballot, and it will cover the counties of San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara. And the measure will need to be approved by 2/3 of the cumulative voters in the 3 counties to impose this increased sales tax. Fiscal effects. If it passes, a 1/8 cent sales tax will be imposed for the next 30 years on San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties. It will generate approximately $100 million. So that revenue will cover the annual $30 million they used to get from those other 3 agencies. And those 3 agencies will no longer need to give it to CalTrain. And it will actually provide CalTrain with an additional $60 to $70 million per year for infrastructure repair and maintenance. Supporters, top ones over here, Diane Feinstein, Anna Eschu. Opponents, Mark Hinkle, president of the VTA Association, director of the Purissimo Hills Water District, and a former manager of commute services. What do the supporters say? They say this funding will save CalTrain from shutdown and preserve CalTrain services for thousands of essential workers, such as nurses, teachers, and first responders. It protects CalTrain as affordable and reliable transit. It will fund improvements, and then that will provide faster and more frequent trains and cleaner, quieter trains to reduce noise and air pollution. It will reduce travel time and provide better all-day, all-week service and provide better connections. And Measure R will have the required financial accountability, meaning that they built into the measure financial audits, citizens committees to analyze the money and its expenditures. What do the opponents say? They say CalTrain ridership might not ever recover following the loss during COVID-19. Riders who are mostly higher income can continue to work remotely, and some riders may be concerned about risks of using public transportation in the future. Low and middle income earners and the unemployed cannot afford adding yet another regressive sales tax at this time, yet alone one that will last for 30 years. And the existing transportation sales taxes can fund CalTrain at its current service level. The proposed CalTrain sales tax will raise $100 million annually, netting an additional $70 million a year for CalTrain and an additional $30 million for the other transit agencies who won't have to donate that amount. Campaign finance. We actually have no financial data for either the supporters or the opponents as of 9/7/20. We'll continue looking for it and checking for it. What is the bottom line? If you vote yes, an additional 1/8 cent sales tax will be imposed on San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties for the next 30 years. A no vote means the current sales tax rates will remain the same. They'll remain in effect. Again, this needs a 2/3 vote of the cumulative total from each county to pass. The next measure, which affects everybody in Santa Clara Valley, is Measure S. It's put on the ballot by the Santa Clara Valley Water District. It's basically a parcel tax extension, and 2/3 vote is required to pass. Same information. The question, Safe, Clean Water, and Natural Flood Protection Program. It's saying, shall the measure to renew this program, which ensures public health and safety by protecting our water supply, dams from earthquakes and climate change. It reduces pollution, toxins, and contaminants. It provides flood protection by renewing the Santa Clara Valley Water District's existing parcel tax without increasing rates, averaging 0.006 per square foot annually as described in the resolution until ended by voters. It will raise approximately $45 million annually. They do provide senior exemption. They do provide for annual audits. They do provide for independent citizen oversight. So basically, they want the current parcel tax to be extended. Background. Measure S seeks to renew this program, the Safe, Clean Water, and Natural Flood Protection Program. Voters approved the existing parcel tax, which funded that program, in 2012 for a 15-year term ending in 2028. The two prior measures approved by the voters included a sunset clause, which means an ending date. Measure S proposes to renew the parcel tax without a definitive end date. Fiscal effects. The current parcel tax will continue, but without a definitive ending date. The measure raises approximately $45 million annually. Supporters. See the supporters over here. David Lewis, Evan Lowe, President of the Santa Clara County Farm Bureau, Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren. Opponents. David Warmer, vote no on Measure S. Trish Mulvey, vote no on Measure S Committee, and the Sierra Club. What do the supporters say? They say vote yes on Measure S to protect our local supply of safe, clean water. Measure S continues county-wide projects for creek restoration, shoreline protection, environmental cleanup, and habitat restoration, and pollution reduction. Measure S continues and accelerates flood control construction along creeks, does not increase taxes, it simply renews an existing local funding. It requires independent citizen oversight and audits to ensure that the funds are spent as promised, and it does provide an exemption to senior and low-income citizens. What do the opponents say? The opponents say Measure S proposes to renew the current parcel tax, but without a definitive end date. This renewal does not expire in 15 years, as have both previous measures. The Santa Clara Valley Water District says that because of pay-as-you-go funding has resulted in project delays, it would need to borrow money in the first 15 years of this program, creating $331 million in debt financing that will need to be repaid by future tax revenue. The Safe Clean Waters Program Independent Monitoring Committee is appointed by the board, calling into question its independence. Restoring wildlife habitat, one of the priorities from 2012, has been underfunded and would be further reduced under this measure. Bottom line, there already is secure funding until 2028. There is no need to enact a new tax now. All current projects have funding under the existing tax. Supporters and opponents, we don't have anybody listed yet. The yes vote means that the existing parcel tax will continue, but without a definitive end date. It won't have a sunset clause until voters decide to rescind it. The no vote means the current parcel tax will continue until 2028, when it will expire. This next measure, Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, in our league's area, the only city that would be impacted would be Campbell, because only those cities or towns that have a designated open space area within them are impacted by this measure. This is another parcel tax extension, and a 2/3 vote is needed. Bottom line, they're asking, shall the measure to renew the Santa Clara Valley the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority's existing $24 annual parcel tax with no increase, generating approximately $8 million annually until ended by voters with oversights and audits, be adopted? Existing. Measure Q, which was another measure that was put on the ballot by the Santa Clara County Open Space Authority in 2014, passed. It was approved by 67% of the voters. And that measure authorized the Santa Clara County Open Space Authority to level a tax of $24 per parcel annually for 15 years. The tax was designed to produce an estimated approximately $8 million a year in additional revenue for the Santa Clara County Open Space Authority. On July 2020, the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority decided to place this measure back on the ballot, the same amount, the annual parcel tax, with no increase and no sunset clause. This tax would continue until ended by voters. Effects if passed. Expected revenue is approximately $8 million per year, which is approximately 2/3 of the operating budget. The difference with this parcel tax, many times parcel taxes are used to fund special projects. This is actually, the money from this parcel tax constitutes 2/3 of their operating budget. The ballot measure asking for a renewal with no increase, no sunset clause, with oversight and audits will be enacted if it passes. The sunset clause that was on the 2014 ballot measure will be removed. Since the proposed November 2020 ballot measure has no sunset clause, it will technically replace the current ballot measure. Everything else about the two ballot measures is the same. Supporters. Number of people over here: Carol Watts, the president of League of Women Voters of San Jose, Santa Clara, retired fire captain, CEO, California State Assembly member, and Mayor Sam Liccardo, Mayor of San Jose. Opponents, Mark Hinkle, president of the Valley Taxpayers Association. What do the supporters say? Basically, I'm repeating pretty much of what was contained already. The parcel tax money is a fundamental part of the OSA budget. They're not earmarked for special projects. They provide 2/3 of the operating budget. Removal of the sunset clause ensures that the Open Space Authority has adequate funding for long-term planning and program execution. It has citizen oversight through a Citizens Advisory Committee and a Measure Q Expenditure Oversight Committee. The OSA's responsibilities are increasing, and the need for the parcel tax funds are therefore also increasing. Long-term parcel tax funding is necessary to provide the revenues that are sufficient and flexible enough to meet the OSA's increasing responsibilities. The parcel tax funds provide local matching to help OSA attract public and private grants. And with increased public visits, they need to have consistent funding for additional public access. The opponents say, low and middle income earners and the unemployed cannot afford to add a regressive parcel tax at this time, let alone one scheduled to run forever. More open space means less room for housing. Less room for housing means the demand for available land on which to build housing becomes scarce, which in turn drives up the price of land and obviously the housing built on that land. Over 1.5 million Californians have left the state in the last decade, primarily due to the extremely high cost of living here. Taxes are killing California by driving businesses and those that they employ out of state. Finance, we had no financial data as of 9/7. We should have that shortly. Bottom line, if you vote yes, the current parcel tax that people are already paying of $24, but without a sunset clause, will remain in effect until the voters rescind it. A no vote means that the current parcel tax will remain in effect until it sunsets in 2030, and it needs 2/3 to vote. Are there any questions on this, Sophia, these three measures?
No question.
Okay, good. And now we'll go to the 3 local measures, and Terry, you're going to take it from here. So let me go back to the first one. Let me find the right place. Okay, Los Gatos Measure A. Terry? Oh, Terry, we can't hear you.
There, how's that?
Sounds good now.
So the question is, shall a measure proposing an ordinance that replaces the town's current finance committee and sales tax oversight committee with a finance commission that would advise the town council on financial, budgetary, and investment matters be adopted?
Hold on just a moment.
So what's the background here? Los Gatos currently does have a council finance committee consisting of 5 members. 2 of them are town council members as voting members, and 3 are citizen members as non-voting members, and they're appointed by the town council. Los Gatos currently maintains a AAA credit rating that notes an extremely small debt burden and also notes a significant unfunded pension liability. So what are the likely effects if Measure A passes? Measure A would amend the Los Gatos Town Code to disband both the existing Finance Committee and Sales Tax Oversight Committee and establish instead a Finance Commission consisting of 7 members, 5 voting citizen members and 2 non-voting council members. A new Finance Commission would serve in an advisory capacity to the town council and increase their duties and responsibilities in regard to the review of the town's finances. Each council member would appoint 1 citizen appointee. So supporters and opponents. Supporters, we have people here, former mayor. These are a couple of registered voters. That's what we have so far. And no information on the finance data so far. So what do the supporters say? Most elected officials are not financial experts, nor do they have a financial background. Measure A will let highly qualified Los Gatos residents with extensive professional experience an unpaid advisory role to the town council. Town and government spending by the town increased by 72% between 2015 and 19. We need to pass this measure to improve our financial oversight and get our fiscal house in order. The existing Finance Committee charter prohibits advising on the town's annual budget and excludes citizen appointees from voting. This measure will have no ability to halt or delay funding for emergency response. This measure does not take away any legal authority from the town council, which is accountable to voters regarding budget and fiscal decisions. So what do opponents say? The town's fiscal house is in great order. The town maintains a AAA credit rating, consistently adopts balanced budget, thoughtfully addresses unfunded pension liabilities, and uses practices best described as conservative, and balances competing policy issues in determining how our tax dollars are spent. The private sector experts already participate. Since 2017, a finance committee with community representatives with the qualifications noted by proponents has been in existence. The town manager's proposed annual budget would first need review by the Finance Commission, and the recommendations accepted or rebutted in writing before going to the council for action. The Finance Commission may make a recommendation of approval to the budget conditional upon a town's council acceptance of one or more of the Finance Commission's recommendations. And commission members would be appointed for 4 years with accountability to no one. All other commissions are established by council and updated as needs change. This commission could only be modified by voters passing a new measure, greatly limiting governance flexibility. So what's the bottom line on this? A yes vote means that the Los Gatos Town Code will be amended to disband both the existing Finance Committee and the Sales Tax Oversight Committee and establish instead a Finance Commission consisting of 7 members, 5 voting citizen members, and 2 non-voting council members. A no vote means the Los Gatos Town Code will not be amended, and the current Finance Committee and Sales Tax Oversight Committee will not be disbanded. Okay, Measure A. This establishes a town finance commission.
Hold on just a moment.
Wait a minute. We just did that.
Yes, there's something that's been repeated here. Okay, let's go on to Measure B. Go ahead, Terry.
Here we go. Okay, Measure B. We're trying to follow the alphabet here. Okay, next slide. Term limits for town council members. So what's the question? Shall the measure proposing a term limit ordinance to require that after serving 2 4-year terms, a town council member is not eligible to run for the town council or to be appointed to a vacancy unless a period of 4 years has elapsed since their last service on the town council? Shall that be adopted? After staying off the council for 4 more years, former members may seek election and serve again. So what's the background? The town council consists of 5 members, each elected by the voters. Currently, it does not impose term limits on its town council members. Measure B is approved. No person who has served 2 consecutive 4-year terms will be permitted to seek nomination or election for a new term unless he or she has been off the council for 4 years. So what are the effects if Measure B passes? An ordinance would be adopted, limiting the number of consecutive terms a member could serve on the town council, thereby establishing term limits. The term limit would be 2 consecutive 4-year terms. After the 2 terms, a person could seek nomination for a new term only after he or she has stayed off the council for 4 years. Supporters and opponents. For supporters, we've got a bunch of people here: superintendent of schools, CFO, the mayor, former mayor, and no opponents registered. So what do the supporters say? Term limits increase voter choice by making elections more competitive and allow more candidates to hold office. Without term limits, incumbents may become entrenched politicians who can forget about the people they were elected to serve. Of the other 14 cities in Santa Clara County, 12 have enacted some form of term limits. Limits also apply to California's statewide elected officers and Senate and Assembly legislators. Due to a lack of term limits and the advantages of incumbency, since 2001, only 13 citizens have served on the 5-person Los Gatos Town Council. Shouldn't more residents have an opportunity to serve? What do opponents say? Well, no opposing arguments were submitted. And there's no financial data from either side. So the bottom line for Measure B is a yes vote means that term limits will be imposed on Los Gatos Town Council members as follows. No person shall serve more than 2 consecutive 4-year terms. 4 years must elapse before a former council member can serve again. A no vote means there will be no term limits on town council members' length of service. Okay, Campbell used parcel tax as a local measure. Next slide. This is called the Measure L, Campbell Union High School District. So the question is, shall Campbell Union High School District measure be adopted, renewing an existing $85 annual parcel tax that can be ended by voters, providing approximately $4.8 million annually, exempting senior and qualified disabled citizens, subject to independent oversight, annual audits, and local control. The background for this: Measure L does not raise taxes. It simply renews existing local school funding to maintain high-quality education. These funds cannot be taken by the state. Since 2005, the funds have supported academic programs, smaller class size, safe and clean schools, and recruiting and retaining highly qualified teachers. Voters in our district renewed a special parcel tax assessment of $85 in 2013 for 8 years, known as Measure E. The tax expires at the end of fiscal year 2022-23. So, what are the effects if Measure L passes? Residential and commercial real properties within the Campbell Union High School District attendance area will continue to pay the renewed parcel tax until the voters rescind it. So, supporters and opponents. Well, I got a number of people supporting it, and a couple of people, got a Taxpayers Association and the Libertarian Party are the opponents. So what does the supporters say? Well, Campbell Union High School District has earned a AAA bond rating due to the proven track record of spending taxpayer dollars carefully and responsibly. Measure L simply renews the existing local school funding parcel tax of $85. None of the funds can be used to increase administrators' salaries, benefits, or pensions. An independent Citizens Oversight Committee will ensure funds are spent as promised. Seniors aged 65 and older will continue to receive an exemption. The California Union High School District has made stellar academic gains over the past decade. So what do opponents say? This is not the time for taxation as usual. School districts need to do their fair share by focusing their efforts on controlling costs and by essential things. Budget assumptions behind proposals like this are no longer valid. With fewer students doing fewer things, asking for approval of a tax like this is the wrong approach. There is a reason that parcel taxes are usually approved for a limited number of years with a sunset clause. It is so voters will have a chance to reconsider them if the situation has changed. No financial data was available on either side at this point. So the bottom line for Campbell Union High School District Measure L, a yes vote means residential and commercial real properties within the attendance area will continue to pay an annual parcel tax of $85 with no sunset clause. A no vote means the current parcel tax of $85 will remain in effect until it sunsets at the end of fiscal year 2022-23.
Thank you, Terry. Sophia, are there any questions in the chat room?
There is no.
Okay. Thank you. Audience members, thank you for your attendance. We hope you have learned a lot today that will help you make your decisions when voting. The League would also like to remind everyone to vote by November 3rd. We are so lucky here in Santa Clara County, and actually the whole of California, that every registered citizen is able to vote by mail. You will be receiving your mail-in ballot in early October and can vote by completing your ballot and mailing it back in the postage paid envelope, completing your ballot and dropping it off at any secure vote box throughout the county, or you can visit a vote center to drop off your ballot, to vote in person, to get a replacement ballot if you need it, and even to register to vote conditionally on that day. Here is a master list of nonpartisan election information. And this is some additional information that we used. Santa Clara County Register of Voters. I'd like to recommend you can download the League of Women Voters of California voter guides in many languages. They're available at this link. Do check votersedge.com. When you enter your address and zip code, you get a copy of your individual ballot. And you can click on any candidate or any ballot measure, and it will it'll take you to another location and give you additional information. It's excellent. And Ballotpedia, which is another website and another platform that gives unbiased information on the ballot measure. Remember, the last day to vote is November 3rd, and we're encouraging people to vote early. And again, we would like to thank you for attending tonight and also remind you that recordings of all of our candidate forums and pros and cons are posted online at lwv-swscv.org/2020 election recordings. Thank you again for attending, and good night. This forum is ended.